for coming out tonight. Those of you who have not gotten food yet, please get that quickly before we get the meeting started. The speakers can have you guys pay attention. If everybody can start by please turning off your ringers on your cell phones. I really appreciate it. Any random rings. I may have already told you this story, but we were sitting at my great-grandma's funeral, and my grandma, her mom died, so she's sitting up there and she's talking about her mom and she's getting ready to just lose it. You know what I'm talking about, how that happens at funerals. And all of a sudden, while we're sitting there, everyone's really quiet watching my grandma about lose it, and my stepdad's phone goes off. And he had a ringer set up for a few of his friends that was just someone that was just cracking up, like, yeah. So right when my grandma was about to lose it, that ringer went off and broke the ice, and my grandma did not lose it on stage, and it was the best funeral I ever went to. So please silence your cell phones. The Mr. Landlord who we're bringing into town, the national speaker, he's getting moved from October to November. It is going to be our normal meeting day, and so that's November 14th, and we're going to be hosting that at Elga's corporate headquarters, the brand new building off of Grand Point and Hill Road, right by the expressway there, that beautiful modern contemporary building. They have a room there that we're going to host that in. So those there'll be emails and stuff going around for that, and please register so we can try and get a head count. Feel free to bring a guest. Guests are going to be free. It's going to be an event we're going to use to try and help grow the organization. So please don't forget about that. Mark it on your calendars. All right. So our main speaker for tonight. Oh, do we have any vendors? No. Okay. Our main speaker for tonight is Tom Wyatt, Executive Director, Neighborhood Engagement Hub. So please help me welcome Tom.
Hi, everybody. This is my first time here, so I've been to Redwood, but this is a cool gathering. I think it looks like a good mix of people. I'm just curious. I want to make sure that I am as inclusive in what I talk about as I can. How many of you are primarily working with properties in the city of Flint? Show of hands. Okay, fair amount. And then in the out county, the suburbs, Genesee County? Okay, all right. Well, I just want to share real quickly a little bit about me, because I feel like it helps to make sense, because sometimes I get a little all over the place in the work that we're doing at Neighbor Engagement Hub. But my name is Tom Wyatt. I'm a Genesee County native, and I grew up in an auto household, and my dad was a shop worker, and just slowly kind of saw the county change, and I've always been fascinated with the city of Flint. I grew up in Grand Blanc, and I live in Swartz Creek, and I'm very interested in kind of neighborhoods and quality of life, and generally what we call it in my sector, community development, which is looking to strengthen these places. But I do have other backgrounds. I ran a homeless shelter in North Carolina for a couple years. I've done other types of programs with youth, and so all of this stuff I feel like is a lot of it's really connected to the work that I'm doing with housing and neighborhoods. Just a little bit about Neighbor Engagement Hub. So we are a Flint-based organization. We're what's called a community development corporation, and what that means is that we are able to go after federal funding to engage in activities that strengthen neighborhoods. Whether a lot of community development corporations are like Habitat for Humanity organizations where they're building housing, but there's also community development corporations that engage in lending to strengthen neighborhoods, whether it's rental properties or owner-occupied properties. And our focus is just kind of really holistic in that we work on all the other things that strengthen neighborhoods. Our mission is that we're a catalyst for positive neighborhood change by supporting neighborhoods to become safe, healthy, and whole. We really like that because it allows us to operate really flexibly based on the needs of the specific neighborhoods and communities. Incidentally, if you have any questions, because we were talking at our table about navigating government, I am chair of my city's planning commission. I'm on the ZBA, and I was a city planner for the city of Midland for about a year, navigating all that stuff. So always happy to answer questions if you're getting stuck in the policies and procedures and ordinances of different municipalities. I have an understanding of that, and I like talking about that as well. We really, we have a couple things that we value, and we were talking about this again at our table. The first thing we really value at our organization is building local wealth. So, you as a landlord, this may be your primary income, this may be your secondary income, and that's really how America built wealth, was on property. If you think of cities, they are a business, and their commodity is their land and the things that sit on the land. So I'm very concerned as an urban planner and as a leader of Neighborhood Engagement Hub as how cities steward their land, because there are good investments and bad investments. And so we're really concerned of how do we help folks build local wealth, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and how that connects to your group in a little bit here. We're very concerned with complete neighborhoods. So I live in a complete neighborhood in Swartz Creek. I live right behind the Miller Road downtown area. And if I didn't work in Flint, I wouldn't really need a car unless I wanted to go visit my family, because I could walk to all of my health care for the most part. I could walk to restaurants, parks, my kids walk to the schools. And that's how it was for a long time. And now we're very auto-oriented, and there's not anything inherently wrong with that, but it does cost quite a bit, and it drags us out of our neighborhoods. So I feel very fond of the things that are in my neighborhood, because if it's like dinner time, I can get my kids and we can go walk down to the burrito shop, and we get to walk and we run into people and we get to talk to people. And that's a little bit of a lost thing that we see in our communities, but it helps people to establish a pride in a place and be happy with their neighborhoods and take ownership in their neighborhoods. And then we also engage in a lot of training and technical assistance that's really engaged in strengthening individuals and groups. And so it ranges from helping people start organizations to helping people write grants for community theater programs. We act as fiduciary and financial coaches on stuff. And so those are really the things that we work at. We have a couple departments that we do different work in. The first department that we're really engaged in is this thing called blight elimination. And if you're not working in Flint, you may be familiar with blight. It's like disarray, it's disorder in the structure of the environment. We are engaged in community economic development, which is strengthening business corridors. So neighborhoods need these amenities, as I said, and so we're working to assist businesses and people that would like to start up businesses and scaling up, so that those locally owned businesses become a greater and greater thing. We've even done analysis of the impacts of national chain big box stuff, and looked at the way that they strip local wealth in terms of the dollars that are no longer circulating in the community, and the tax value that provides basic city services. And so we look at all those things and try to help inform the government and organizations and others that are in this realm to make data-driven decisions. There's nothing we engage in called placemaking. It's a general term for some of the improvements that you see. In some places it could be streetscaping, in some places it could be improvements to parks. We do get involved in some public policy stuff. Now we don't lobby, but what we find is we want to look at, again, what's the root cause, and what are some of the things that we're seeing that are leading to the issues that we're having in our neighborhoods, and using that data to really have an informed discussion and strategize, rather than kind of a shotgun approach when we're presented issues. We're starting to get into public safety work. So for those of you that are in the city, probably more prone than some in the county in terms of some of the public safety challenges, but we are looking at strategies that address, drug crime, property crime, and violent crime. Myself have a background in managing multi-million-dollar grants for the DOJ for that, and actually do consulting across the country with law enforcement and other agencies. So that's something that you are interested in knowing more about, or wanting to chat more about. That is another area that we do work in. So, what does this look like? We are concerned with eliminating blighted structures. We're concerned with illegal dumping. We are looking at providing fee-for-service at a lower cost to residents and organizations in the city of Flint for maintenance of those properties. We act as a fiduciary for a number of small neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods that some of your houses may be in, if you're in Flint, maybe going after small grants, and because they're not a 501c3 or they don't have a certain designation, we act as the financial manager for that, and we help coach them, and then some of those transformative projects then impact the houses and neighborhoods that your houses are in. We're also looking at business incubation. How do we activate commercial properties? So there's a lot of land bank properties, for instance, that it's very hard to break into that market unless you have the capital available, and so we're looking at ways to assist people with that. We just put in a proposal to Huntington Bank to do a real estate development cohort to help people who want to break into this market or expand into different housing types or different types of property. We're also looking at how can we assist people when they want to modify those structures. So for instance, the city of Flint just legalized in their zoning what we call accessory dwelling units, as you may know as the granny flat or the backyard cottage or the carriage house above the garage. That's another income. So you could build, I think, up to a 700 square foot structure in the property, which could then become another rental unit, or it would be attractive to people who want to live in a place where they can have intergenerational housing, because a lot of times you have families where maybe the elderly in the family cannot afford to go into some type of assisted living, and so maybe the house isn't conducive to that, but having 2 units next to each other makes that even more attractive. So we're looking at that type of stuff. The city also legalized low-density multifamily, and so there could be some conversions. And so what we would specialize in is connecting. And I want to say we don't take a fee for any of this. We're a nonprofit, so our job is to provide technical assistance. But we would connect with architects and planners and others to identify how do you take this property and then develop it to the whether you have this large house and no longer makes sense as a large house, and so you want to convert it to 4 units, or you want to build an ADU on the back. We would like to help with that type of stuff. We also work with neighborhood plans. So, as said, there's plans that neighborhoods come up with for improvements, whether it's maintenance or streetscaping, lighting, all that stuff that adds to the quality of life in neighborhoods. We also are focused on, just picking a couple here, supporting arts and culture events. I don't know how often you have turnover in your renters, but a lot of times there's this kind of FOMO around, well, I'm in this place and it's all right, but I bet there's a place that's just slightly better. And we all know how much that can cost in turnover and finding new tenants and having to repair stuff. So things that are in the neighborhoods build what we call place attachment. And you have people that want to stay in those neighborhoods. They want to stay in those places longer, and so you have more stability in your tenant landlord situation. And we found that to be true when I was working at Kettering University. I worked there for 6 years, coordinating all the investment in what we call the University Avenue corridor. And it started with a lot of blight elimination work, and then we started with some of the economic enhancements. And during the water crisis, we were doing a target market analysis for housing to see what kind of housing was needed and what's the annual demand based on type and lifestyles. And one of the things that was interesting we found was that the city started losing population during the water crisis. The people that wanted to get out got out. And ultimately, the city lost 20,000. Well, that area, because of some of the placemaking and other things that were happening, always had 6,000 residents. And we found that when we talked to people, people were moving in. If people were leaving to go somewhere else for some reason, whether it was the water crisis or they had to move, there were always people that wanted to live in that area. And it was because there was stuff going on, and there was trails and parks and all these things. And ultimately, we did a study, and I'm in the midst of another one right now. We saw that there was about $150 million of private investment in that area alone once we started partnering with Hurley Hospital, McLaren, U of M, and working with the neighborhoods on those things. And we started seeing a lot more real estate development as well. A couple things to highlight here. One of the things that might be beneficial to this group, at least for those that are in Flint, is there's really not strong data collection around public safety, and so how do you dispel, fact versus kind of perception in terms of how safe or viable space is. And so again, I have a background in data analysis for this, and we're looking to work with the city to start to do some mapping so that we can actually look at some of the problematic areas and resolve those issues with local law enforcement and with community members, which then has a radiating effect in the neighborhoods. We also, provide support in terms of we have physical space. We have 2 buildings that we own. We have an old Citizens Bank on Martin Luther King Avenue, just south of Pasadena, and then we have a pole barn in the back. And that pole barn actually is a tool shed. So from April to about mid-November, it's open for any resident or organization in the city of Flint to use. It's got zero turns, riding mowers, brush hogs, weed whips, ladders, paint sprayers, hand tools. We also have a mobile event tool shed that we set up this year. So if your neighborhood group wanted to have an event, we've got a portable PA system, generators, popcorn cart, tables, tents, chairs, lawn games, so that they can do social stuff like block parties. And the only thing that they may incur from the cost is maybe renting the porta potty. But we see on average between 1,500 and 1,600 checkouts. And so a lot of, outside of what the land bank and some of the city mowing is happening, we see a lot of groups that are coming and you can't afford a lawnmower. And so you can come check one out with us. We've got push mowers, we've got riders, we've got zero turns. We deliver the heavier stuff to you, and it's no cost because it's paid for actually by the federal government. And we received that grant, and actually we received a record allocation this coming year, so we're going to even expand even more. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is home repair tools. So, things that necessarily wouldn't require you to pull a permit, but maybe you don't have a handsaw, or maybe you don't have a circular saw, and you need to make a repair on something like your deck rail. How do we provide those things as well? Because you can rent some of that stuff at Home Depot, but if you don't have that money, then where are you going to get it from? And so those are the types of things we're trying to reduce those barriers on. We're also looking at, we allow activities to happen at our program or at our space. So we have a group right now this week that's teaching people how to do air and soil testing so that they can advocate for changes to the way people and companies are disposing of this stuff. We have a group happening that's doing a series next weekend where they're teaching youth building trades, because that's going to be a huge thing. I think that's going to hit all of us is this, they call this silver tsunami, all the baby boomers that are getting out of the building trades. And since 2008, there haven't been that influx of people because it was seen as a very risky thing, similar to the auto industry. And so, historically, we've built, I think since 2008, 1 million fewer homes nationwide since 2008 than we needed to. And so there's a huge supply and demand. And now that there is a ask for housing, it's insanely hard to find a contractor. I'm working on stuff myself in my house, and it's like we're looking at early next year to get some work done. So we want to expose kids to career pathways like the building trades, so they can be the future handymen and women, and they can work in different trades in whatever they're interested in. So we provide that space. We're really trying to look at the total environment, say, well, it's not just the problems, with the abandonment or the blight in the case of the city, or it's not just public safety, but there's all these different things where they have these levers that are pushing and pulling on each other. And ultimately, they all have some type of interaction. So, so we're looking at those types of things and a lot more. And this is relatively new. So I actually was recruited to come to the organization almost a year ago, and we spent the last year just reinventing the organization because there was a lot during the pandemic that kind of dissolved, and there was a desire by the board to kind of reinvent ourselves. And so we've been spending a lot of time on that. So some of the stuff is still emerging. But I was asked if I wanted to talk about, or if I could talk a little bit about grants and resources available. So largely grants, I get a lot of calls, and I get a lot of calls at Kettering where people say, is there a grant for this? And people generally think that grants are just available for anything and everything. Generally, they're a funder like the C.S. Mott Foundation or Huntington Bank has a list of priorities in which they want to support, and then they will make those available, and then they limit certain things, like oftentimes capital improvements are off the table. Sometimes staffing is off the table, but a lot of things that improve the community are on the table. And so it really kind of depends on what grants are available, and being strategic with what's available and when. There are research grants, there are philanthropic grants, there are corporate grants. We get grants from General Motors, we get grants from Huntington Bank, we get grants from the Whiting Foundation. and others. So it really kind of depends. But generally I would say that grants are received mostly by nonprofits. So there are ways for for-profit small businesses to receive grants, but they often have to partner with organizations like myself or Metro Community Development or somebody who has a 501c3 designation that can receive that. And then it has to obviously align with the stated goals and objectives of the person or individual that's giving out the funding. I would say, and I'm not saying this just because I'm trying to promote my organization, because I was just asked to come here and talk, so I'm happy to talk about what we're doing. But that said, we are in a unique place where we are open to working with any of you, and I would say even out county, because again, I'm invested in the out county as well. I'm very familiar with most of the Genesee County area. So our goal as an organization is to provide no-cost consultation and look at, is there something that we can help, whether it's knowledge or some type of resource, or can we connect you with somebody? And that's what I've spent most of my last 10 years doing, is just connecting people to resources or trying to brainstorm. Because these types of things, Flint, Detroit, Genesee County, Wayne County, the Rust Belt, we're kind of unique in some ways. And someone said, well, we just got here first. And so the challenges that we're encountering, whether they're economic or housing or neighborhood, we really got here first before a lot of the other, just like probably the Southwest is going to get there first when they run out of water, and they're going to have whole different problems. And there's others that'll have other issues. So we are here. I forgot my wallet, actually, and so I forgot my cards. But my email is pretty easy. My email is director, because I'm the executive director, at NEH, so that stands for Neighborhood Engagement Hub, so nehflint.org, and you can reach me there, and we can chat more about navigating government, real estate development, whatever it might be. I figured I would set aside some time just for questions, because I think I can only assume what questions there might be, or specific things you are wrestling with or curious about as a landlord. So I figured it might be more appropriate if there were any questions. I'm happy to try to answer them or follow up if it's something that needs following up.
I'm just going to take a moment and just say, first off, I want to set the tone for some question and answer. I've had the privilege, and I'll relate this way. Right now, I've got a house where I had to fire a contractor, because he sure did talk a good game. Oh, I can do this, and I can do that, and I got this, and I can do that. But can I tell you, I intentionally structured his contract in phases. He talked real good, sounded good. What I replaced him with was another guy. I hardly hear from him. He's soft-spoken. He calls me every once in a while if he needs some material. Sometimes he just gets it and gives me the receipt, and he gets the job done. Sometimes I really appreciate how undervalued someone who doesn't have a whole lot of voice, but they know how to get stuff done. And I'm sure most of you can relate with your houses. Tom is that guy. In a lot of regards, there's a lot of people in our community, in a lot of different community spaces, they have loud voices, they make a lot of noise. You're going to see them, you're going to know them when they walk in the room, because they're going to make sure you knew they were there. Tom's not that guy. Tom is a guy that's just behind the scenes, actually moving things forward. So he's so modest, and I'm expressing this because some of you have been courageous enough to buy houses in neighborhoods that stink. You've been courageous to continue to own and manage those houses in neighborhoods that have struggled. And quiet is kept. Some of you, if only somebody would take care of that empty building over there, or do something with these lots over there, or if somebody would put something into those other houses, you feel that much more confident about your ability to rent out what you have to quality people who will stick around and be happy. Pretty much what Tom is saying is their organization helps bridge a lot of those gaps. I'm not saying it's a magic wand, but I am expressing the importance of this is probably going to be an ongoing conversation for many of you. This shoe does not fit everybody's foot. I've had seasons where, frankly, as long as my cash flow is there, I care less how ugly the neighborhood is. I'm not there anymore. Tom here, let me just say this, he's consistent, and he's not gonna promote himself like this, but I'm thankful he was willing to take time today. He's been consistent. I think probably 7, 8 years ago, I went to a placemaking certification workshop at Habitat. Who was the instructor? Tom was. That's where I met Tom. Then a few years later, I think we were doing a neighborhood cleanup over by my office, and who was the contact at Kettering that helped us to get students out to help do the neighborhood cleanup? Tom was. I found out about this cool little cohort of training for developers who like to develop small stuff in other neighborhoods. I didn't know it existed. And who did I connect with at that event? Tom was there. He's consistently behind the scenes with cool stuff that gets things moving forward, and more or less his fruit usually speaks more boldly than maybe his physical presence does. I'm expressing this to the Landlord Association because there's a lot of cases where, candidly, if we begin to look at ourselves as we are really the backbone of change. In a lot of these neighborhoods, if we don't fix these houses, nobody's doing it. If we don't renovate and cut the neighbor yard and do this and do that, nobody else is going to do it. Tom has the ability to help us to align with other governmental resources that whether we can get the grants or not, these organizations have the ability to carry some of that weight so that we can stay focused on our business and at the same token still be the bridge and gaps in the neighborhood. And so all that being said, I want you to be comfortable asking any questions, but the main thing is I'm hoping that as a landlord association, we keep this in mind moving forward because I had a conversation maybe 3 meetings ago with someone here. I said, hey, I'm focusing on this neighborhood. Somebody at the table said, oh, I got 6 houses in that neighborhood. Somebody else said, oh, my management company manages 36 houses in the neighborhood. Before you know it, there's like 60 houses in the neighborhood that if we decided to connect with Tom or somebody, we have more power together. So all that being said, let that digest. And if there's any specific questions that you have, please feel free.
You law enforcement in certain areas.
Are you speaking like the rec area, or you say golf course?
No, law enforcement.
Law enforcement. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Well, because as we don't know, we have issues, right? And one of the issues that no one can see, I haven't heard any speak on, but you call 911. You have I think it's roughly a 46% chance of police officers. It's 50-50 basically. That can be very detrimental. But as landlords, sometimes you have tenants that are different. So you don't want to get an altercation.
Yeah.
We need law enforcement. Law enforcement doesn't show. So what does that leave you as the landlord? You're smart, you walk away. But now your property is being destroyed. You have no recourse on that. I mean, you do and you don't, but you also know the courts are another issue. So is there something that we can do work with you that will bridge some of the gaps here? Maybe it's financing with law enforcement, or that they need something that we can change those numbers.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we spent about 5 years working on that in the Mott Park neighborhood, the Glendale Hills neighborhood, Carriagetown, and they ran area around Durant Perrymont Elementary School. And we had a lot of problem properties. Sometimes you may have a grandparent and kids move in and they basically run right over her. They throw parties and all kinds of stuff. Sometimes they're running drugs. Sometimes you have multi-decade drug houses next to your property. And so we've developed different strategies based on that. And so we partnered with, Genesee County Sheriffs, the Michigan State Police, the Department of Health even sometimes gets involved in that. There are various strategies that's kind of like looking at what's the specific issue there to deal with problematic property owners or problematic tenants and how to address that. We also look at whether social services or other agencies are not law enforcement. So I'm a big proponent of kind of like it doesn't have to be police only. In fact, that's what our strategy was. Like the police, if you're working in Flint and you call the cops, it could be 2 hours before they show up, if they show up at all. And they were just overwhelmed. And we tried to hire more cops, and they said to that area, and they said, well, we have 100 cops at the time, and we have about 12 on patrol after you divvy out the commanders and everything else. and we already gave you 2. If we give you any more, the rest of the city is like really down even more. And so our philosophy was, how do we engage with the community to try to reduce crime so that we reduce the need for police to intervene in that. And we were successful. We saw between 50 and 80% reductions in violent drug crime, property crime, vandalism. We saw an increase in people connecting with their neighbors, and then we saw that investment of 150 million in the area. But it was really looking at the data and seeing like, what's the problem? Because quite often it's not the neighborhood, like you said, it's one property and like what's going on in that area. So we would absolutely love to look at that. It probably involves some specifics, and we'd be very confidential about that. We've got strong relationships with the other law enforcement agencies. And incidentally, my wife is a data scientist who does all this work for the University of Michigan for Detroit and Flint. So she's like their crime expert. So we talk about this stuff at dinner sometimes.
What about we talk about the Flint police, but we have the Genesee County Sheriff's.
Yeah.
Right here. And for a while, you were talking about the state police were heavily involved, which really did help. But I don't see the Genesee County police around.
Yeah.
I see their paramedics, but so you see all the cars out by the jail. Are they really active in Flint? I don't really see that myself personally.
I would say it depends on the administration and different, I don't want to say like ego, but the different kind of, I've worked with several Flint police chiefs. I don't know the current one really that much, but I've had some where they absolutely wanted to work with the sheriffs, and then the administration changed and they say, it's all us. We don't need your help. We will handle it. You work in the out county. Mostly the sheriffs that we've worked with have done stuff with drug houses, because there's like a 3 strikes and you can get your property padlocked, which I don't think a landlord wants that necessarily, but that's how we've worked with them on multi-decade drug houses. Dog fighting or animal cruelty and some other things. And then we worked with the state on some drug stuff, and then they worked with the party stores. A lot of the party stores were, I don't want to say all of them, but the ones that we were working with were selling to underage. They may have had some illegal gambling in the back, and then they were committing snap fraud, which was essentially, you walk in, I don't know if you walked in a party store and you see all this expired stuff. Somebody walks in with their SNAP card and they buy it, and then they come back out and they come back in and they say, hey, this is expired, and the person gives 50 cents cash on the dollar, which they can buy whatever they want or they can take it. And so they're basically making money off the Fed by taking these EBT card dollars. So we had some of them that got shut down like that because of that. That's illegal. You go to prison for that. So there's a variety of ways that the law enforcement kind of work together, but it really depends. And then honestly, Flint police, they are just trying to respond to what they can.
But if you touched on something, so if I'm a Flint police chief and I have an ego, and I say, well, I'm understaffed, I can't do my job, my officer can't do my job.
Yeah.
And there's law enforcement right there, but I don't want them to work. That should get fired. That's an incompetence at a level that's,
Yeah.
I'll intervene slightly on this because candidly, there's a lot of issues in the midst of a lot of great things with our law enforcement in our area that I don't know fits fully in your scope, but there's probably an overlap. I'll at least add this. I think I just saw our 6th Ward council person just 2 weeks ago make a post about the county sheriffs intervening, and there was a collaboration.
Yeah.
And she showed forth some things that did take place in the neighborhood as a result of that collaboration. So I would like to think, at least in this season, in this moment, it may be stronger than it's been in times past. Good. And the other thing that I'm reminded of is you're asking about safety of spaces and properties. Again, I know I'm not the only one. If I got a tenant going into a house, I had a house we renovated, and the house next door was all overgrown grass, belonged to the land bank. Where are they at today? I don't know. The lot next door, all overgrown. Then there's an empty building and another empty building, looking like crap. Then I got another house to the right that looks terrible. I know who the owner is, but he's not cutting the grass. You know what they did? They got a tenant getting ready to move into a 2-bedroom house and pay me $750, and that house has been sitting for a long time. I want them happy. So I paid a crew to go cut the grass at all the properties, and I paid for it. The tenant's happy, and unfortunately, have to maintain it. Candidly, part of what I'm hearing from Tom, there is an overlap, whether it's the tool shed, where there's tools available, that if you got neighbors who want, the neighbors are loving it.
Yeah.
If given the opportunity, and we will give them the opportunity, they will go get tools and come help out. It sounds like Tom's got some resources that if you were to engage with the neighborhood association, there may be some means for being able to get some extra pressure put on the land bank, or some grant funds, or some neighborhood funds to beautify some stuff that's near where you are. And I'll say this, since we've done that, and since we've done it in some other areas that used to have a lot of break-ins, frankly, when the stuff is clean and neat, there's no place to hide,
Makes a big difference.
it's a lot less likely for our stuff to get broken into. Because I own a building 2 doors over, and it got broken into in broad daylight. And I had commercial tenants that occupied the building.
Yeah.
We had to empty the rest of the stuff out, so there's no place to hide, and we have any problems. So
Yeah.
I'm bringing that back to town.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm saying, funding, some operation.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of strategies where if you just got a crew, we can go through and do an assessment of the property and show you where the vulnerabilities are. Because similar to you as an investor looking at, is this a good investment on my funds? Criminal offenders are looking at space and saying, is this a good target or is this an unsafe target? Is this a good investment of my criminal activity or is this not? And so if you've got a property where the whole fence line has the little whippy trees and everything's grown up, it's like once they get back there, no one can see what they're doing. They can pry a window open, they can do whatever. But if you've got trees that are cut, 6 foot, so generally somebody my height can see through there, and you've eliminated ambush points and stuff, and you've got proper lighting. We've found techniques for low-cost lighting, cameras, stuff that doesn't require electrical, installation, and we've given out grants for that before when I was at Kettering. So there are different things to look at, but absolutely, it's all about the norms and behaviors. And it's like if you walked into a place and you didn't know what the rules were, and you just saw kind of chaos, then it's what you're going to expect. But if you have a place that's lacking in disorder, then people are going to be less apt to be disorderly.
Ooh, you know what? This is so random. Back to the bricks. I was down there with my son, and I saw a tenant that we had in 04, 05. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and we're talking. And he legit told me about, such and such, I just cut the grass today, because they dropped off that zero turn, and I got it done. I'm like, what? Who dropped off a zero turn to you? What are you talking about? And he begins to tell me that there's this organization that he goes to that he had to do like an hour or 2 hour training, but now they will drop off. He has to call it and schedule. They'll drop off a zero turn mower, and he mows his grass and a bunch of empty lots on the block. And they come pick it up, and he said he does it every week. And again, it took me a little bit of talk with him to realize he was talking about neighborhood engagement hub. And so
commercial
these are resources that are out there.
Yeah, and all we ask is that people aren't running over stuff that's going to destroy it. Just watch to see if there's bottles and things. But I mean, they're $10,000 units. Yes, sir.
I would tell you this. The land bank was started with all the best intentions.
Right.
But I think the land bank is probably one of the worst things about the city of Flint real estate as we sit here tonight. There have so many properties they can't handle them. They don't know how to sell them. Their list of people who can't buy them are larger than the list of people who can buy them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just government amok. And I would tell you that if they haven't solved the problem today or by today, they're probably never going to solve the problem. And my experiences with the land bank is the city of Flint would have been better off without. There was a couple of years they couldn't afford to cut the grass. And so the property next to you had knee-high grass, and the city was beating on me to cut my grass.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing was a bad idea. How do you end a bad idea that on a daily basis screws up this city? Nobody wants to do it.
And it's really, we talked about that today. It's the word that comes to mind when I think about not just the land bank. I mean, I know people there. I've got friends there, and so I respect what they do. And I'm not saying you don't respect it, but there are some issues. I think the word is fatigue. That was a triage strategy that has been going for over a decade. How many people would go to an ER and sit in triage for a decade? Like, you eventually have to have a solution. And I don't think that we should have a land bank doing that for 50, 60 years. Like, there's a problem with that. And absolutely, you're right. It's I know people that want to buy property, and unless you have the money to bring it full code compliant, without even seeing what needs to be done, you've got to invest in all the pre-development work and show you have the financing. In some cases, we're hearing that people say they have the financing and they still won't see them. So there's some issues there as well. Yeah, and the mowing as well is a huge issue. Yeah.
There are a lot of issues.
Yeah.
They said at one of our meetings, which I don't know if I fully believe it, but they said at one of our meetings, their budget only allows for them to mow each property once a year.
Yeah. And right now this summer it's been pretty challenging because if you have a property next to a land bank lot and you have somebody in it, they will mow the entire front lawn. But if there is nobody next to that, they will only mow the one pass of the zero turn.
In addition to that, if they do sell a property, they split the taxes for the next 3 to 5 years with the city.
Yeah.
And I would argue that the city would be better off getting that money that elected representatives then, at the will of the people, will move and cut grass and fix things up.
Yeah.
Because unelected bureaucracy could care less about the will of the people, the neighbors in the neighborhood. You know, I think the first thing to make the city of Flint a better place is either reform or replace the land bank, period.
And it's a serious issue for real. I mean, the taxable value that's lost. We've run an analysis on duplexes. You know, your standard 1,200 square foot duplex. If you had an acre of those, it'd be 28 times more productive than the Walmart in Flint Township. And if you look at the Family Dollar on Saginaw and Fifth versus the 501 building where the 501 Bar and Grill, if you had an acre of those, it would be something like 18 times more financial, which pays for more police, more fire, basic services, road maintenance. But instead, you know, you're not yielding these you're not reaping these dividends at the tax value.
Meanwhile, Family Dollar's thriving and every dollar store in Flint's going to business.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, every part store.
Yeah, and how does that, I mean, how does that impact you as a landlord? Hey, come live in my community where we have the same places as every place in the nation. We don't have unique businesses like mom and pop shops and all these other things, but we've got Family Dollars and Dollar Generals whose stated plan is to be out of there in 10 years and leave that building empty.
Is that their plan?
Yeah, there's a theory called dark store theory. And so like in Swartz Creek, we were fighting it with the Meyer on Morris Road. They said, well, the Lowe's and a couple others are vacant on Corona Road and they can't sell it because that building is so unique. So our tax appraised value should be cut in half because in the event that we ever leave, we should not be paying for something that's not showing that we can get that benefit from. Kroger's does it, all the national stores do it. And then the cities have to fight, you know, with lawyers to try to retain that because it can kill a business district. And so they're stated Walmart's more in other communities. Ours have been here for quite a while, but I think if there was other areas for them to develop, they would probably abandon some of those and go somewhere else.
Just like they tore down Myers on First Road.
Yeah. And that's probably unique. I mean, most places just leave it, but Myers somehow, you know, they tore it down.
Yeah, saving taxes.
Yeah.
But that building had issues.
Yeah.
It had structural issues, loss.
Yeah.
No, actually.
We're also interested in partnerships. So maybe some of these investments in your neighborhoods are there's to some extent you are gonna maybe you would borrow a zero turn from us and mow, but I wouldn't expect you to have a huge financial stake in properties that you don't own. So we're looking at other creative ways. Like I was talking to Lisa about tax increment financing, and if we helped a business district grow and the taxes are frozen at a certain level, which is similar to like a downtown development authority, the uptick in the tax value as things improve is invested in the surrounding neighborhood, which makes the neighborhoods, the housing and everything else benefit. There's also micro tax increment financing, which we were looking at, where we were looking at how can people develop more property, more housing or other units when the appraised value is lower than what you have to put in it to get it to occupancy. And so there are different structures that we're looking at where that tax increment can offset the loss that you would incur financially, but be able to get that property to market and have the investment, and then eventually the comps go up. So there are different strategies. Not all of them work in different places, but there are different strategies that we're looking at my work is really, my job is to try to be creative and look for solutions. You know, we throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, and then we try to take it as far as we can. But we don't make any claims that this policy is gold and this policy is junk. It's like, what is going to work based on what's in your neighborhood and who's involved and who can we bring to the table.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out and delivering a wealth of knowledge. Our next two speakers are Kelly Bettleman and Rachel Dillon. Kelly is with the Executive Director of the Center for Civil Justice, and Rachel is with MDHHS. So please.
Good evening, I'm back. Again, I'm Kelly Beitleman from the Center for Civil Justice. I'm here to talk about the eviction diversion program. For those that aren't familiar with the program, we had set it up to launch before the pandemic hit. And basically what it allows is for rental assistance to tenants. But it's a program that is initiated with the landlord. The tenant then applies for funding from DHHS to help with their rental arrearage. Instead of going from community partner to community partner, all the community partners with funding get together in order to cover the entire rental arrearage. And then the eviction case ends with a dismissal instead of a credit damaging judgment. When we were ready to launch the program, the pandemic hit. And so we held off because there was an eviction moratorium. And then, as you know, Michigan got a bunch of federal dollars. They got COVID emergency relief or rental assistance. And there was the program started by MSHA to assist tenants with rental assistance. So I know all of you are probably familiar with the SARA program. When we learned that the SARA program may end, we decided to revive the eviction diversion program and to launch it so that there would be help available for tenants with any rental arrearages. I learned late Friday that MSHA is looking to put money from the ARP towards another rental assistance program. I have been trying to find out today more details about the plan, where MSHA is at with such a statewide eviction diversion program plan, but I haven't been able to obtain any information. But our program will not start as long as there are federal dollars for rental assistance, and if and when that program ever ends, then we'll be able to launch the eviction diversion program. So while I was here to talk to you about how the process will work once the SARA funding ends and the community partners that would be coming together, we're going to put it on pause until we find out what the plans are with this new amount of money that MSHA is going to look at in creating a statewide eviction diversion program. I brought with me today Rachel from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I guess last month there was a lot of questions about who has prevention funding, who has rental assistance funding for tenants. And in the program that we had planned, the Department of Health and Human Services would really be the main funder for the rental assistance that the tenant needs. And so Rachel's going to talk to you today about the eligibility requirements. For those tenants that are not eligible for the SARA funding, they are going to the Department of Health and Human Services to apply for state emergency relief. So Rachel's going to talk to you about that program. She's an expert on it, and answer your questions that you may have. Thanks.
Hello, my good buddy Tom is passing around a flyer. It essentially, there's 2 pieces of paper. I did not know how many people were gonna be here, so you might have to share. I will give you all my email before I leave, so you guys have a contact at MDHHS. I think sometimes that is a great barrier. Who do I get a hold of? Who am I asking for help? Who am I sending my tenants to? Especially Genesee County has moved into this universal caseload world where clients don't have a specific worker that they reach out to. It's whoever gets their application next in line processes it. So sometimes clients, tenants, landlords, they have no idea who to reach out to. They don't have a direct contact. So I will give you my email. And I'm just gonna give you a rundown of what MDHHS can offer to clients. Essentially, our eviction prevention program is to help prevent homelessness or resolve homelessness. So that's what MDHHS can help with. So we really evaluate who's at risk for homelessness or who's already homeless. And in order to make a determination, there are a few things we can use to process their application. So they submit an application online, and we could have a court-ordered eviction judgment, and we can have a summons. So sometimes we can use that summons and then reach out to you all directly as the landlord and get the amount needed before that client has to go to court and have a judgment. So even if we're just at the point in the process where we have the summons, that's why this one-on-one contact is going to be more vital, because we can reach out directly and say, how much does this person need to resolve their emergency? We have the summons and we can move a little bit quicker. We can do proof of homelessness. So if someone's residing in a shelter, we can use that as proof. We would just reach out and make a collateral contact to that shelter and verify that they have indeed checked in, and then we can move forward with processing the application on our end. Or if the house has been condemned or deemed unsafe, that's another reason. So if you guys are working with someone who's getting funding from or applied for funding through MDHHS, we would be looking for those things in addition to their application. So we really do need a verification of the need amount. How much do they need to move into your place? How much do they need to prevent being evicted from the place that they're currently living? So we can get a statement from the landlord. Sometimes there should be dollar amounts on a judgment. Written statements signed and dated by any landlords are sufficient. And again, collateral contacts or an order of judgment. So those are all things MDHHS can use. And then factors that affect eligibility. So if you have a client that you think might qualify or be able to get help through MDHHS, one thing we really look at is, does that client have enough income to maintain ongoing rental payments? So have they had, a decrease in hours at work? Did they lose their job? That really is a determining factor with MDHHS. If they can't make that rent payment, the state is going to deny it outright, because they know in a few months, if we resolve the emergency now, in a few months they're going to be back in this position again. So that is a big factor with DHS determining their eligibility. And then another thing we look at is their 6-month payment history. And I think this is something that, at least from my experience, clients get tripped up on. We do ask for a lot of verifications. And this is something, this one-on-one contact with landlords and either a manager or a worker, we can get that 6-month payment history if we have that contact quickly. We're not sending the client, can you run here, can you run there, can you do this? If we have that one-on-one contact, you all could send in an email or a ledger saying, here's how much they've paid over the last 6 months, and that really clears that piece of our puzzle up very quickly. So when we look at the 6-month payment history, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but when we look at the rental history, if their rent obligation is $500 and they're only making that $400 payment, what they've been missing over those last few months turns into a co-payment. So they still have to pay those funds before DHS would release their money. So that is how that portion of the program works. If the client is homeless or they've been living in their car, their home is flooded, and they haven't had a 6-month payment history, we can give good cause for that. So that's another thing to pass along to potential tenants, that if they can't get a 6-month payment history, we are allowed to give good cause in certain situations. So I think part of the problem is that truly clients don't know what we need. It's hard to get a hold of someone. And then we're asking the landlords for information and they don't have a direct contact either. So I just thought listing these things out of the gate, it's just an overview. This is what DHS needs to make a determination to issue out the money. So you guys, everybody has, well, probably one per table. If you need anything emailed to you, I'm more than happy to do that. On the back of that page is the maximum payments that MDHHS will make to a client who's applied for assistance. So it does come down to group size. So you'd see on the left-hand column the group size in the home, and then on the very right-hand side, I've highlighted the maximum payment that MDHHS would issue for that group size. Another thing that I think is it comes off as a complicated piece of the process, but if you want to receive a payment from DHS, you do have to be enrolled as a provider and have a provider ID through the state. It's a two-step process. So the other piece of paper is how to become a provider through the state. You have to get a specific ID number, and that allows MDHHS to mail you a check or directly deposit money into your bank account. So you would just call the 888 number at the top, and they begin the registration process. And once you start that and give them, your account number and where you want that money to go, then you fill out the second portion of this form, and it essentially lists your business name and your tax ID, and they meld those two together. So when the client applies for help, we put in your provider ID number, and that allows the payment to go directly to you as the landlord. So if you have any questions about either of these pieces, I'm open to that. I will give you my email address real quick. It is Dillon, that's DILLONR, and then the number 2, at michigan.gov, Michigan spelled out all the way. If you have any questions or you're working with a client, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And sometimes if we do deny, sometimes other agencies, that's what they require, that clients sought out assistance with the state first. So even if it is a denial, they can take our denial to other agencies and they see it as, okay, this person is trying, and then they can move through their steps getting their funding as well. Are there any questions?
An easy question for you is we've been advised through legal counsel that we're better off doing 30-day notices, that we just want the property back as opposed to 7-day for a specific amount of money, that we can still settle with the tenant if they come up with the money. And the changes are necessary because of recent changes in the legal system through the Supreme Court of Michigan and COVID and yada, yada, yada. If we wind up with a tenant we're evicting with a 30-day notice that they just want the property back, will you still react in the same way?
If you're gonna completely, at 30 days, give that notice and you want them out of your property, what we could do is help them relocate to another property.
We're doing that based on the changes in the legal system.
Great.
In other words, where before we had a judgment for $572, now we're just working on a 30-day notice for trading time for money.
Right.
But you're going to wind up with a tenant who's only being evicted because they owe money. And how will you react to that tenancy, termination of tenancy judgment?
The 30-day you're saying?
30-day.
So they could bring us that 30-day and we would potentially help them relocate somewhere else.
Would you wind up helping them settle with their current landlord if it's the issue is really money?
So, Rachel, what he's saying is, we probably,
You do
so,
that
yeah,
to
you
prevent
probably are
eviction.
missing the.
No, the money is to prevent eviction for the state emergency relief. So the landlord isn't gonna get paid and be able to evict.
Well, that's not right. So here's the situation. So normally we do a 7-day. But if you do a 7-day, and they say, oh,
during these times.
during these times. So, and then they say, well, serve it, right? And all of a sudden, boom, it's like that adds 30 days before anything's gonna happen for us. Anything. The judges won't do anything. So instead of getting stuck because that's what we're doing. We're getting stuck with 3-4 months of no rent. And all we really want is the money, right? If they could get caught up, we'd be fine with that.
And
So
the
instead of
Sarah-
doing 7
that's the
days, we're
Sarah
having to do
program.
30 days.
Yes, that's the Sarah program, and that's coming to an end. MISTA is going to start a statewide eviction diversion program. We have no information yet how that's gonna work. But the Sarah program, yes, it left a bad taste in everybody's
It's a bad
mouth
taste. It's
because the funding
wild.
didn't come for
If
a
the tenant
long
comes to
time.
you and says,
But-
look, I'm being evicted on a 30-day notice.
Right, I
and
understand.
They just want the property back.
Yeah, if you want the
Well, my
property
landlord
back.
said if I pay $787, I can stay. Will you still help him at that point? That's the question.
The question, if you're going to be serving a 30-day to evict, then DHHS will help them with security deposit and first month's rent to move.
To leave. Because your paperwork
So you
is,
lose, we still lose, no matter what.
your paperwork is essentially saying that you want that property back in your possession. So then DHS's job is to provide security and safety for that client. So that really is our job, you know, and I know that I'm speaking to kind of the other side, as we would say. Our job at DHS is to get that client stable and to have them be in an environment where, you know, they're not facing that emergency any longer. So if you send us that notice and saying, basically it's a demand for possession, we want that back, we're gonna move forward with helping that client get stable housing, which would be moving somewhere else.
And I understand that
Is that we're not sending 30-day notices because we want our place back. We're sending 30-day notices because that's the fastest route to possession. Because all they have to do is show up to court, they say, I've applied for Sarah, they provide no proof that they've applied for Sarah. They could not even apply for Sarah, they could say, I'm going to apply for Sarah, and it's an automatically 30-day adjournment.
right,
So
and that program,
we get a court date to start.
and that program is coming to an end. And I know it's been frustrating. I know that it took months to get money. Certainly for landlords that accept vouchers, they were paid throughout the entire pandemic. But the Sarah program didn't get landlords paid. What Rachel's talking about is assistance through DHHS for tenants that are not eligible for Sarah. Remember, the Sarah program's ending. So if there was an active court case, they might be eligible for Sarah. But Rachel's with DHHS. And I will tell you that you're not going to wait months for DHHS funding because you register for Sigma. As soon as that money is approved, or that case is approved, that money goes right into your account. This is not gonna be
And we, just so you all know, we
months delay.
have 10 days to make a determination on an SCR application. So we have to have a decision out to the client within 10 days of that application being submitted. So the client would know how much DHS is willing to pay and what amount, if any, the client would need to pay on their end. Registering in Sigma would speed that process along. Instead of waiting for a paper check in the mail, it would be immediately deposited upon the issuance from DHS.
So if we had a problem with the tenant, do we need to do a 7-day notice and continue that process? Or would it be a 30-day notice? If we just want them to get their rent caught up, we'd be okay with them staying. I mean, which way, because there's a different process. If you just want them out, you send 30-day notice and leave. But if we just want the rent collected, are you saying a 7-day notice is not sufficient? We have to go through the process for a judgment?
No, the 7-day notice is sufficient
Okay.
in order to get paid
In
from
order to get-
DHHS.
yes.
If you do a 30-day, which isn't always available,
Correct.
you have to, it needs to be a month-to-month tenant.
Yes.
There's certain reasons
Yes.
that allow you to do a 30-day.
Okay.
If you have a tenant in which you're allowed to do a 30-day and you decide you don't want the money, you just want them out, then that's what you do.
Right, different scenario.
So, but
Right.
if they're getting assistance, you want them to stay, they've been a good tenant, they've paid regularly, they're just having this temporary hardship, then you do the 7-day and you
that
let
would be- that would get
DHHS
this
work.
process started.
Right, but it's not Sarah.
Right.
DHHS did not
Right.
administer the Sarah program.
Correct, yeah, it's different, yeah, I definitely
We
on
got there. You guys aren't responsible for their mess.
Yeah.
But we can't find out who it is.
So sir, did you still have a question in the back? I know his hand was raised. Did you still have a question?
Yeah, so people think like a lot of people treat late fees as if it's a penalty, the tenant for paying late. The problem is like right now I got a tenant grand plan who's into us for $8,000. If I had a mortgage on that property and I couldn't afford to make the mortgage payment, I've got late payments and all that stuff. Can we start getting late fees as part of these judgments? Because like they're real, paying rent late does cost us money.
DHHS, is that part of the eligibility? Do you pay late fees?
We do pay late fees. We would pay whatever is listed on the paperwork, and that can include late fees, yes. It would be whatever needs to be to resolve the emergency. So we would want that bottom line dollar amount to resolve the emergency. Now, if you have someone who's $8,000 behind and they are a, 4-person family, we're only paying $740, and the client's gonna have to come up with the difference. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
That one, they showed up, or they didn't show up to court because someone told them don't show up and you're gonna automatically adjourn. So then they show up to court, so they got an adjournment. The second time they show up and say, oh, we applied for Sarah, even though we already told tenant we're not accepting Sarah for coming in. So now it's automatically a 30-day adjournment. And then by the time you actually get a court date, it's more than 30 days. Now here we are waiting for our next quarter.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
No, that's typical, right?
That's typical.
That's where it's the
Yeah.
problem. This is exactly what's happening to all the landlords. And contrary to popularly, not everybody's rich and can afford $8,000 because that's like 4 years worth of profit.
And another thing, a lot of the tenants, that's my situation. And she's pressing all the right buttons. She's living for free and destroying my property. I mean, destroying.
That's sad.
Told me you're not going to get a net for that. So, I mean, they know how to use the system. And like this gentleman said, someone starts hitting you for 5 Gs, there's your profit margin for a couple of years. You don't make a lot of money on a single family. By the time you pay your insurance and your taxes and so forth. So we're looked at as we got deep pockets, but that's not necessarily.
Everybody thinks you're getting rich, but
Yeah.
it's a slow boat to China, and you're rowing with one paddle.
That's true. Sorry about that experience. But hopefully you'll understand what the eligibility is for the DHHS rental assistance. And again, that will be used for folks that are no longer eligible for Sarah. I think you'll have a better result.
Now, we appreciate you stepping into the fire pit. We really do. Whether you feel it or not, we do. Because at least you're here explaining things where the other folks just no-show us.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you again. Any questions, feel free to email.
Rachel, can you draw 50-50? All right. So our last thing before we adjourn the meeting is I do want to draw 50-50. So I'm going to have Rachel draw. The last 4 digits are 6117. So whoever wins, be sure to thank Rachel. 6117. Bueller. 6117. All right, we got a winner. Awesome. So before we leave, thank you for playing. She's got your money. I just want to remind everybody one more time, November 14th at Elga Credit Union is Mr. Landlord, the godfather of landlord himself, besides Henry.
I'll see you guys on November 15th. Thanks, have a really great night.